Welcome to Break Bias. I'm your host, Brad Kramer. It's the 81st episode, and I am here for the last Break Bias episode of 2023. This was one of my favorite episodes last year, and it's going to be a great one this year as well. But before we get to the awards and, well, just how wrong I was at the beginning of the season with all my predictions as well, first, a quick reminder to check out the link tree in the description. It has links to pages like all the platforms you can find this podcast, like my YouTube channel, Break Bias, Twitter, and TikTok. It has my email address if you'd like to contact me, as well as my personal Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Now let's bring on old friend of the pod, Andrew Shackleton, and of course, co-host of the Brakies. So let's hand out these awards. All right, welcome back to the Brakies, the annual episode where awards are given out for different drivers, teams, or moments of the 2023 F1 season. First, I'll list the nominations as usual, Shaq, and then I'll discuss who or what Brakies should be awarded to with you. You can come up with your own ideas, but I guess first of all, before we get going, how have you been?
Sounds good. Yeah, man, I've been really good. What a season.
What a season for you,
Pretty
I imagine.
pretty predictable, but no, I really enjoyed it. No, it was good. How about you?
Yeah, it was a painful season for a Mercedes fan again, for sure, especially how it ended. Even though we ended up getting P2 in the constructors, it still was just like a very gutting end of the season, especially with that Brazil performance and just how Lewis ended the season was pretty bad as well. But here we are. We're hoping 2024 is turning over a new leaf. I don't have any faith, but we can just hope, right? Before we get started, I was gonna say, like, this coming up with the nominations for this year was way harder. I don't know about you, but I struggled to come up with some for these categories because 2023 was a tough season to come up with exciting moments and whatnot.
Yeah, 100% agree. Some of the categories are like best race or best Sunday performance. It's pretty easy just to give that to Max Verstappen every single time. So like to try and dive in and try and really find like, okay, who else really stood out a weekend, or what was the funniest moment or drama or anything like that. Yeah, it was tough. We had to dig a little deeper this year, but I think we have some good nominations coming up.
For sure. Well, you named the first breakie that we're gonna move on to, and that is race of the season. So that's not a driver performance. That is just as a fan, which race did you enjoy watching the most? I wouldn't say there was any real bangers this year, like last year when you think of Silverstone or the race in Brazil that George Russell won. Like those two races were phenomenal last season. This year, I have a ton of nominations. I think these were all good races. None of them were great. I got Las Vegas. I think that was obviously a great race. Britain with, the McLarens kind of taking the lead at the start and challenging Max. It kind of died off in the end, but then we got the late safety car and Lewis and Lando had a great battle at the end of the race there. The Dutch Grand Prix, I think that had the most overtakes of any race of all time. Just chaotic weather. Singapore, of course, we finally got a win outside of Red Bull. Maybe you don't like Singapore as much as some other people, but it was a pretty good race. Australia, just to feel like chaos, the red flag at the end and all the crashes. And then just I added Italy with the Ferrari battle with like Sainz just defending for his life against Verstappen. And then Austin, I think, was a good race where it did seem like Lewis Orlando did have a chance against Max right up until the end. So yeah, I know that was a lot of nominations and probably stole a little bit of your thunder, but I just felt like no race really stood out this year.
You say no race stood out, and then you just named the entire calendar.
Yeah, pretty much exactly. So they're all in contention. Um, did any other race stand out, or is there one of the list that I just gave you that you
Yeah,
really enjoyed?
yeah. I mean, the ones you listed were great. Obviously, Singapore was unreal with Science, Lando, George, and Lewis just battling out at the end. That was unreal. That was You gotta love that as a racing fan. Like you said, the Dutch Grand Prix, that was a great one. One I think that you didn't mention that I personally enjoyed is the Canadian Grand Prix. Obviously, I'm biased as we're Canadian, but I thought that was an unreal podium with Lewis, Alonso, and Max
Yeah,
up
and
there,
Adrian Newey.
and a stellar drive by Albon. Yeah, and
True.
Andrew Newey. Yeah, that was a sweet podium. Um, so that was up there for me. And I'd have to go with Monaco just as a weekend of all with the
See,
qualifying
you know what?
and the race.
I was gonna put Monaco in there, and then I'm like, I feel like anyone listening to this, there would be an outrage if we chose Monaco best race of the season.
Sure.
It's not best weekend. If we choose Monaco as the best race of the season, I mean, I guess that sums up 2023 pretty well. But I just couldn't bring myself to put Monaco in as a best Sunday of the season. But I do hear you. It was pretty decent with the changing weather and whatnot. Um, well, how about we just narrow it down here? I mean, I think I would have to choose probably Singapore or Vegas.
I agree. Yeah, both unreal races. Vegas kind of smashed my expectations of what it was going to be. And yeah, Singapore, obviously the non-Red Bull plus a four-way battle. I think you'd have to give it to Singapore, in my opinion, just just
I
because
can
there was
I
no
can
other
get on board
race
with
of the
that.
season that you're actually like kind of a nail biter at the end.
Well, and I even remember like with the Singapore Grand Prix, like I watched it or maybe I even watched it in the morning. I don't remember if I watched it live or not actually, but I remember getting to the end of the race and then being like, "All right, guys, like like Bailey, who doesn't watch like Formula One as much anymore because it's
Yeah,
it's been a tough year for casual fans." I was like, "Okay, guys, if you're gonna watch any race, like you got to watch this one." And he was
yeah,
even like, "Hey, yeah, like I'm turning it on right now." So yeah, I'm down to give it to Singapore.
yeah. Agreed.
All right, there we go. First breakie of 2023 handed out to the Singapore Grand Prix, best race. Congratulations to Carlos Sainz, I guess, as well, because that was a sick performance. I honestly think the Ferrari drivers put together some like incredible performances. Like obviously
Mhm.
what Max did was pretty much amazing every single Sunday of the calendar, but I think the Ferrari drivers also stood out here. And I think that's a perfect segue into the next award, which is Best Sunday Performance of the season. So this one is a driver performance. I'm going to start off with the nomination that I think might be the best objectively, and that is Max's win in Miami.
Mhm.
That was pretty incredible. But of course, Sainz's win in Singapore has to be mentioned. I think Leclerc drove a brilliant race in Vegas. I think that P2 was pretty incredible. And then I also added in Ricardo P7 in Mexico. I think that was a pretty sick drive. Especially, I think maybe the qualifying stood out a little bit more, like him in P4 than the actual race, but pretty good. And then I also had Alonso P2 and Zandvoort.
Yeah, those are all really good ones. Again, that's a really hard one to not go like pick Max for, just because he dominated so many different Sundays. Um, but other than the podium, I know I mentioned it just briefly before, but dude, Albon in Canada blew me away. And I am just on the Albon hype train right now. I was just listening to the High Performance podcast where he went on. I
Oh
don't know if
yeah,
you
yep.
checked that out. Dude, this guy is in a different level right now mentally. And I think he's so ready to go to a top team. And I'm a huge Albon fan, and I would love to see him go to Red Bull or any top team, really, because I think he's ready to, like, he's right there with George and Lando, I think, and his prime. And yeah, I don't know. In that race in Canada, I just think that was a stellar performance. The qualifying and then to defend all the way at the end there on the hards, that was unbelievable.
Yeah, I kind of do wish I added one Albon performance because I feel like there were just a few Sundays this year and I guess qualifying performances as well that just like completely stood out. Like he was phenomenal. And Canada certainly was one of them. So I'm down to put it in the mix, but like
And I just think a
Max's
Williams,
Miami race was so
yeah,
good, man. It was so
yeah,
good. Like
dude,
I feel like
A Williams and P7 on a Sunday just shouldn't go together, and Albon somehow made that happen.
multiple times. I think he had two
Yeah,
P7s throughout the year.
yeah,
I
yeah.
can't I think maybe Monza, maybe that was a P8. I don't know. But it is kind of funny. Like if you look at his entire season, I don't think he ever finished P9 or P10. Whenever he finished in the points, he was like up there,
Yeah,
P7 or
yeah.
P8. Um, yeah, so okay. So what's in contention here? Because I mean, I think my vote's got to be for Max in Miami, but like, are you pushing for Albon in Canada best Sunday performance of the season?
Dude, it was just electric for me. I mean, I think Verstappen's gonna get enough awards tonight. So personally, I don't know. I would have to go
Wow.
Albon.
Okay. Okay. Well, you mentioned Albon's ready to go to a top team. What does that look like for you? Because I mean, 2025 silly season is primed to look pretty crazy.
Man, Red Bull is like we talked about this on the last podcast together when the whole fiasco with Ricardo and De Vries and was going on. But like, I don't know, it is just such a massive question mark and asterisk beside Red Bull on what happens with that second driver's seat because teams are coming next year. McLaren's going to be there. Mercedes has a completely different concept. Who knows how competitive it's going to be right away, since it is going to be a new car. But like Sergio cannot do what he is doing right now if other teams are in the mix. And they're going to have to make a decision whether that is Ricardo. I honestly don't think I saw enough from Ricardo this year to like be like, oh yeah, he's ready. He's better than
It's all about
Sergio.
next year, though. It For Ricardo, it's all about this up and
Yeah, of
coming
course.
year.
He didn't get a full year. Yeah, 100%. But again, if he doesn't show that next year, like Red Bull's got a lot of questions, and I think Albon's just a guy I think you can trust, and he's proven what he can do in the worst
That'd be
one of the worst cars in the.
crazy.
It'd be nuts. It'd be sick though.
Okay, well, we got to pick one here. I'm saying it. I think it's got to be Max, man. From
Okay. I
P9 to
mean, I'm
do
not
that.
I'm not gonna I'm not gonna argue with Max.
I mean, because Checo on
Yeah.
pole in that race, it was a tight championship fight at this point. That was the whole turning point for the season, in my opinion.
Mhm.
When Max pulled that off from P9, just inching closer on older tires to Checo, like it was incredible what he did. And I think it just completely ruined Checo mentally that race. And I
Yeah.
think that's when we start to see Checo's performance completely tail off. And this question about Albon is created because of that race in Miami from Max. So
Well
I,
said.
I'm standing by it. I think it was sensational and probably easily the race performance of the season. So
Let's do it.
okay. All right. Max's win in Miami, Sunday performance of the season. Now we've mentioned a few of these already because now we're going into the qualifying performance of the season. This is the only new award that I've added. I think last season I had it just performance of the season. So I wanted to split up race and qualifying because I find it hard to pick a qualifying performance over anything that someone does in a race. So I want to shout out some good quality performances here. Again, this might be the runaway favorite, but Max's pole lap in Monaco, that sector 3 was magical, of course. But some other shout outs, Lewis on pole in Hungary. His teammate was P18 in that race. Leclerc, pole in Baku, was the first kind of, I think, crack in Red Bull's armor the entire season. So that was pretty special, and he's always special in Baku. Albon, P4 at Zandvoort. P4 in Williams in qualifying, pretty sensational. Hulkenberg, P2 in Canada. Of course, he was relegated, but that was only because he was blocked a driver. Like he still did put it second fastest. And then Ricardo, P4 in Mexico.
Yeah, great mentions there. I think like those are all amazing qualifyings from those drivers, but like in terms of pure just on the edge of your seat,
I knew you were
um,
going with this.
looking at that, bro, like dude, Verstappen in Monaco was unbelievable. He was so far out of that in sector two. He was like 2/10 off or something like that, or maybe even 3/10. It was something crazy. And that final sector was just insane to take it from Alonso. Um, like if you're talking about the best quality and the best quality city or track, it's got to be Verstappen in Monaco, no questions.
Okay, well that's confident. So I will say this. I don't know if I've ever seen a qualifying lap or at least a sector where like you could just visibly see the car was getting pushed to the limit and it was on rails. Like it was sensational to watch. However, I find it to be actually a little bit overrated considering he isn't the fastest car and he was down on Alonso for the first two sectors of the lap. And Esteban Ocon also pretty much matched him in sector 3. Like I think he was a few hundredths off and he was in an Alpine. So to me, the whole lap, it was the situation that made it so incredible. The whole lap as a whole is actually a little bit overrated. With that being said, it is qualifying in Monaco. It's the most important one of the year. At that point, he was keeping Red Bull's, streak alive. So in a sense, it was still completely magical, although the lap was a little bit overrated. Did I change your mind at all?
You didn't, but I see your point. And the only other qualifying that I've seen that was like, I was literally had the same feeling inside when watching it
Jeddah.
was Jeddah and Verstappen.
Yeah.
Like that was fucking insane.
Yeah. His
And that
first
was
sector
like,
was also magical in Jeddah. It was
yeah.
insane. Yeah.
And I agree with you. Like, yeah, he's in the best car, but like the Red Bull was not a qualifying car at all.
Yep.
So I don't know if that point's really. Anyways, I still stick with it for stopping Monaco.
Okay. Well, if you're that confident about it, I'm not really confident about any other one, so I'll give it to Max. But if I had to choose a second, I think I think Hulkenberg. Well,
Damn,
even
yeah.
that one's tough because he finished. I
Changing
think it was
weather
like,
conditions.
well, I know, but I think he was 1 second or 1.2 seconds off of Max, and he still finished second. Like I think it was actually like a ridiculous gap. So it's
Yeah.
a little bit chintzy too, I guess. But okay, anyway, it doesn't matter. Max pole position in Monaco, two straight for him. So let's move on now to the funniest moment. You said you struggled to come up with these. I did a little bit as well, but I got a few here. None of them again really stand out. But anyway, this is what I got. So I got a couple Martin Brundle interviews. The one
Okay.
with MGK is obviously
Yeah.
the most recent one that was just ridiculousness. But there was one early on in the year too with Cara Delevingne. Do you remember this one?
I have not seen that one. No.
Okay, well, if you haven't seen it, then it's going to be hard for it to win. But I'll tell you what it is because it was hilarious. Brundle was trying to talk to her, and she was like, and like people like in her little entourage were saying,
Oh, you know what?
like
Yes.
no,
Yes,
like
I did see this.
yeah, and he was like, I'm sure it would have been extremely interesting.
Yeah, yes, 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 yes.
So
That was a
I
great
just wrote down Brundle dunks on Cara Delevingne. I thought that
Yes.
was awesome. So that was just the interview ones. I also just wrote down the entire Netflix Cup. I don't know if you watched it, but it was just a total shit show.
Yeah.
So not really for that Formula One related, but still hilarious. Then I got a couple Russell moments where he thinks it's raining, but he's just sweating. It was pretty
Yeah.
good. And then also he went for the wrong gap in Singapore. You saw
Yeah.
that? We're like,
Yeah.
yeah. He went into the barrier that said Singapore, but it said Gap. And then I think this might be my favorite. The jetpack guy falling in Austria,
Oh, that
just
was
completely
crazy.
wiping out, and then Oscar
Yeah.
Piastri's reaction to it. I think that might be my pick. And then I also wrote this one down because it did make me laugh, was Perez saying that it was nice to see three Red Bulls on the podium at the first race with
Yeah.
Alonso's Red Bull. I did
Yeah.
think that was hilarious. But anything else?
I have two that you didn't mention. One of them was a bit of a saga, and that was just Max and GP together and some of the radio messages.
Good
I
shout.
thought
Good shout.
some of those were freaking hilarious, and they're just like an old married couple basically talking to each
I
other
think
over the
wasn't it
radio.
Belgium? Wasn't it Belgium where it was like it was really bad where Max
Yeah,
is like, I'm trying to push to like get fastest lap and GP was like, use your head.
yeah. He's like, we're not worried about the fastest lap. And
Yeah.
he's like, I am. Yeah,
Yeah. That's a
that's
good
kind of where
show.
it started. But yeah, from there on out, like Max and GP, there's some really great moments. And the other one that I had was oh, the Vegas Grand Prix with Bruce making the announcements, and he gives out Sergio Perez, and Sergio comes out, and he just looks
Good
stupid
call.
standing there and has
Good
no
call.
idea where to go or what to do.
That was a good
I
call.
thought
I
that
did
was
forget about that.
so. Those are my
Honestly,
two.
honestly, I would put that Checo one up against the jetpack guy. I think that might be the top two.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like that was just
The
yeah,
Perez that one was a great call. That was hilarious what Checo did. Which one was funnier for you? Checo?
I don't know. Yeah, I was just like it was so cringy and so awkward watching it, but just hilarious.
I
I
would
don't
give
know.
it to that. That was hilarious.
Okay.
All right, there we go.
Yeah.
Checo awkwardly reacting to his introduction. I don't know what do you want to call it, from Bruce Buffer. I think picking something in Vegas is appropriate for funniest moment, right? So,
Agree.
um, worst team weekend of the season. So this was just a team that was a total shambles for the entire weekend. Um, I got a few here. McLaren and Bahrain, the honorable mention every single season from here on out, is always going to be a disaster for that team, apparently. Mercedes and Brazil, that was quite a shocker. Even though they were still like a midfield team, I guess, it was just like the expectations they were going in saying that they could win, and then just how gutted they were after two. Like Toto looked like he wanted to crawl into a hole and die after the race. Um, and then I also put Alpine in Australia, actually having a
Yeah.
great race and then crashing into each other on the red flag. Terrible. And then also Baku. You might not remember this one as well as I do, but Otmar, obviously not their team principal anymore, was going into that weekend saying that we have a new upgrade and we're going to challenge Mercedes. They were confident that they had found like two tenths and they were going to challenge Mercedes, and then they blew up in two straight sessions, complete reliability problems, and then they were like the slowest car in the entire field after bringing this so-called great upgrade. So a horrendous weekend for them. And then of course Red Bull in Singapore. I don't really know if it was really that bad, but uh
Mhm.
yeah, that's all I got.
Yeah, my number one was McLaren and Bahrain. Coming into the season like that was disastrous. It wasn't only that, but it was the next like three or four Grand Prix that just weren't really going for them until they got their upgrade in what was it, Italy? I think was their first package or something like
Austria, I
that.
think.
Austria? Okay. But yeah, definitely McLaren and Bahrain is up there for me. I completely forgot about Alpine and Australia. That was a disaster too.
Yeah.
I mean, after you said that, I was like, okay, that might take the cake over McLaren and Bahrain. Um, because that's the drivers going into each other versus just the team and the car not being there. Um,
Yeah, well, and also like they double DNF'd in Hungary as well, but that was like more of a fluky scenario
yeah, yeah,
where like that was like their drivers literally just miscommunicating and then costing their team so many points.
yeah. And I want to say like the Alpines were in decent positions at that time in Melbourne. Like
Yeah. Yeah,
that's
it
got to
looked
be.
like yeah. Okay. Are you definitely feeling that? Because I think Mercedes in Brazil also deserves a pretty good shout there.
Yeah, no, that was good. Yeah, I know what you mean with like Toto. Like the morale of the team was at probably the lowest of lows that weekend. Like some of the quotes Toto was coming out with that weekend were just so depressing.
Yeah.
And
Well, I
yeah,
was
no, that was
depressed watching the race because I Brazil's my Interlagos is my favorite track.
Mhm.
It is my favorite track, and Mercedes always does well there. I was predicting a pretty good result. Um, and I expected it to be a great race, and just watching my drivers who pretty much always qualified poorly this year and then made up ground in the race. So like there was always something to watch on Sunday for a Mercedes fan because they were
Mhm.
always moving forward at least. Sure, they were never competing at the front, but always moving forward. That race was just oh my god, like their tire life was horrendous. It was yeah, it was so bad. But it wasn't a double DNF.
No, they
that
still scored.
that
They still got
well,
double points, didn't they not?
no, Russell retired.
Oh, Russell retired. True. Sorry, but
Russell
Hamilton
retired.
still finished.
P9,
Okay,
P8 or
that's pretty.
P9. That's pretty
Yeah,
bad.
yeah, yeah. I mean, if you
I would
want,
give McLaren a pass because they actually knew going in to the
that's
season that
true.
they were
It
going to be
wasn't a
slow.
shocker. It wasn't a shocker. Yeah, I mean, if you want to give that to Mercedes,
Okay,
I
well, let's do it. I'm
Mercedes
indifferent
Brazil.
about Alpine or Mercedes. So
Yeah.
all right, so Mercedes and Brazil, worst team weekend of the season. And honestly, if you asked them, they would probably agree. So I think we chose the right one there.
Mm.
Now most fun result to watch. I got well this I want to say last year, this one was filled with way more fun stuff. Like we gave this one to Kevin Magnussen pole. Like Kevin
Yeah,
Magnussen on pole is sick. This year
yeah.
we have nothing.
No.
So of course it's the Signs win just because another team won, even though it
Mhm.
wasn't like Signs' first win or anything. I think Alonso P3 in Bahrain, just Aston Martin being up there was sick at the beginning of the season. He was so pumped that like he got out of that Alpine nightmare and was on the podium in his first race. I got the Piastri sprint win in Qatar.
Mhm.
Uh, And then Lewis pole in Hungary signs pole at Monza just because it was a Ferrari on pole in Monza.
Hmm. I would probably have to go with Alonso just at the start of the season in general. What was that? Three or four back like consecutive podiums for the guy. Like no one would have thought that he was going to be on the podium. Well, maybe in the season, but like him and Aston Martin to be that dominant at the start of the year versus everyone else in the against the grid other than Red Bull. And then just like vintage Fernando back was just unbelievable. The other thing I could say about Fernando was his Brazil moment against Perez. That was pretty special and pretty crazy ending as well. That I'd have to nominate as well.
Okay. Yeah. The only
If
reason
we're
I
going down
didn't
to
put
the race, like it's a specific race, right? Like a specific moment.
it's just most fun result, but I want it to be a result, not
Right.
just
Okay.
like a fun moment.
Hmm.
To me, the result meant more in
Yeah,
Bahrain.
for sure. Yeah. No, if you're gonna give it to Fernando, yeah, I would agree. If it's going to Fernando, then the start of the season in Bahrain.
Yeah,
Uh,
I mean, I knew the Lewis pole wasn't going to mean a lot to other people. You know, it's his 104th or whatever. For
yeah.
me to see him back on pole was awesome. But I figured that might not be as popular with you. I'm okay with giving this to Alonso because I think everyone just seeing Aston Martin up there and like saying it was an Alonso masterclass to leave Alpine and go to Aston Martin, like
Mhm.
that was sweet. So I like that one.
Yeah, no, I agree. I like that as well.
Okay, we're gonna move on from that one. Alonso, most fun result to watch. Now the meme of the season. There's a few here. So Fernando dating Taylor Swift.
Mhm.
I think that was definitely pretty good. The George Russell intro pose, I think, was overdone quite a bit throughout the season. Just sticking his
Yeah.
pose as many places as you possibly could. Um, this one was a great one. I don't know if you, yeah, I'm sure you had to see this, but like the Logan Sargent, what the fuck is a kilometer?
Yep.
Yeah, that's great. 5 second penalty for Ocon, and then
Mhm.
the Max Verstappen podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that was kind of like the little bit overrun, like the George Russell intro kind of thing. Is
Yeah,
good. But dude, George had so many good ones. Like honestly, one of my favorite ones, and every time I see it, it just makes me fucking laugh, is when he's in the parade, the drive parade, and he's like in this like stance and then turns back.
yeah,
Have you seen that one?
yeah, yeah.
Dude, like, oh my God. It's
Russell was
just,
a walking meme this year. Yeah.
yeah, he was just looking really spicy in that moment.
Yeah, did you hear he actually explained what he was doing? Like Mercedes did like a little YouTube video with him at the end of the year, like going through some of his funniest moments. And
Oh
he
yeah.
explained like why he so aggressively looked behind. Apparently it was because in the driver's parade, he was waiting to get to this part on the track to like look at a bump or something. And he
Uh,
was waving at fans, and then he realized that he missed his chance to like look at the part of the track that he wanted to. So then he
God,
aggressively like looked behind him to try to see the bump.
for
But I guess
sure.
he missed it.
Uh, yeah, I don't know. Like the memes were pretty hurting this year.
Yeah, the Taylor Swift one was honestly more annoying, but I had to throw it in there.
Yeah, no, for
It
sure.
got stale really quick.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I
I
honestly,
think the funniest one might be Logan Sargent, but if you feel like Russell was the walking meme this year and it has to be something for him, I'm also on board with that.
yeah, I mean, just pretty much everything George does is almost just funny to me. The way he talks, the
Blimey.
way he like, walks. Yeah, like I don't know. Uh, if I had to give to someone, I'd give it to George personally.
Okay, so just George Russell was the meme of the season. I'm
Yeah.
on board with that. Okay, so congratulations, George, for having a bad season on the track, but being hilarious for us. All right, just a couple more. The drama of the season. Now, last year compared to this year is a joke. Like we had the cost cap, we had the Alpine Piastri blunder, we had Checo and Max at Brazil. Those are the only three I wrote down for last year, and I think they would all beat the ones that we got this year. I got Thursday night in Vegas. That was
Mhm.
very dramatic, of course. Pierre Gasly just throwing a complete fit in Japan. The Qatar Grand Prix, the driver conditions, and the tires, like the maximum stint, and kind of just that whole craziness that created there. I mean, also anytime track limits could always be thrown in as a drama of the season. Like Austria was ridiculous. Like 1,500 laps had to be reviewed after the race. But my pick would be De Vries getting dropped and Ricardo getting put into the seat.
Yeah. Those are some pretty good in-season drama bits. I do agree with the whole Ricardo De Vries situation. Another thing that happened off the track that I thought would be interesting to mention is the Andretti bid to Formula One. Um, Again, we're looking for things to bring up, but that is a pretty big topic, and I know a lot of teams are either for or against it, more against, and from it looking like, or it's looking like now that they are going to get a bid to enter Formula One. Obviously, it's not official that they will. Is that correct? Or they?
It's just approved by the FIA, and
Yeah, it's
Formula One
approved.
still has to
Exactly.
approve it as well.
Okay.
But like with Cadillac coming in as, or sorry, GM coming in as an engine manufacturer, like I know you listen to the race quite a bit. Like
Mm.
they've pretty much outlined it perfectly as well, and I've said it on this podcast too. Like what bid is ever going to make it into Formula One if this bid doesn't? It's literally the perfect bid.
Yeah.
So no, I think that's definitely worthy of a shout too. So yeah, which one would you pick though?
I mean that's kind of like off track drama. If you're going for like on track, then yeah, the whole De Vries situation, Ricardo, we literally had a podcast on it mid-season about it. That was a pretty big moment. I would have to give it to that.
Okay. Yeah, I think Thursday night in Vegas would be the only one that I would maybe challenge
Right.
it with, just because that how much hype was going into that Vegas Grand Prix, how many people were watching, how many people got screwed over by that shenanigans. So that's really the only one that I would say is also worth it. So you still sticking by the Red Bull driver scenario?
Yeah, and like if you weren't really paying attention that weekend, like I feel like F1's kind of really swept that whole situation under the rug and has not been brought
I
up.
haven't I haven't heard an update on whether
Yeah,
fans
if
they
you
just
weren't
got
watching
their
or on social media that week, you would have no idea.
fair enough.
But so yeah, it's pretty sketchy. Um, I don't know. In terms of like a big media thing and the drama, it's got personally, it's got to be Ricardo and De Vries.
Okay. Well, I kind of agree. So the drama of the season is De Vries getting dropped after it was like 8 races. They give him like
Mm.
no time. And then Ricardo was put in. Now, the surprise of the season, I think also Ricardo returning could be the nomination for that. But since we picked that for drama of the season, let's just leave that one to the side. It would be lame to pick it. So I got Aston Martin starts with a bang. Aston Martin goes completely backwards. And then the McLaren Austria upgrade, their resurgence, and then just Red Bull opening the season with 14 wins in a row.
Hmm. So out of those three, I literally had those three written down: Red Bull's dominance, Aston Martin, McLaren's resurgence. But I think as like surprise, I think people had a pretty good idea that Red Bull was gonna have a good season, and still like there was not really a doubt that Max was gonna be world champion and Red Bull was still gonna win. Like, so I want to say surprise. Yeah, they um past our expectations of what the season was going to be, of course. McLaren, yeah, that was unbelievable. Their resurgence back into what was it, P4 they finished. Um, yeah, it's insane. But I think I personally, I think you have to give it to Aston Martin from P7 to P5. I mean, when you put it at that compared to like what they did at the start of the year, it doesn't sound as good. But they were second place for the longest time. And that was just a major surprise to see where they've come from, to see Fernando Alonso back. And honestly, if Lance Stroll could just learn how to drive, or if they could get some competent second driver, like Aston Martin could have done so much better. And if not, finished in P2 or P3 if they just had a second driver. So personally, I'd have to go with Aston Martin just because it really came out of nowhere.
Yeah, I mean, I think Aston was probably the most surprising thing too, because I mean, like I was hyping them up in the off season, like they were like my team. I don't I think I remember doing like a predictions episode with you or something and really talking up Aston Martin, but then I was still too cowardly to put them ahead of McLaren or ahead of Alpine. And I wish I did at least Alpine. I mean, come on. I don't know why I was so high on Alpine. I think I still have them P4, which is just terrible in hindsight. But no, like everyone thought Fernando going to Aston in the offseason was like a terrible decision. Like, why would you leave a manufacturer to go to Aston Martin, like this perennially underfunded team, even though it's not really now. But um yeah, I think right off the bat, like when people were hyping them up in testing too, everyone was still like, no way. Like this
Mhm.
can't be like it can't be that good. And then Alonso's on the podium in the first race, and everyone was like, how is this a thing? Are we actually gonna get an Aston Martin title fight? Of course, that didn't happen, but still, that big of a performance gain over the winter was still incredibly surprising. Um, I think the McLaren one, like to gain that much speed, like I didn't think anyone was going to be that fast, but this big upgrade that they were bringing, like they were hyping it up, like the team was right from Bahrain saying like we're gonna have our car in Austria or whatever it was. And everyone was like, okay, like at least then they'll be on terms with Alpine probably, or maybe a little bit better. And then to like be challenging for race wins was also a big surprise. But McLaren, people have higher expectations for, I think. Aston Martin has never been that team, so I'm with you. Um, Although I did predict Mercedes was going to be the constructors champion. So for Red Bull to open the season with 14 in a row is also a bit of a shock to my system. But I agree with you. I would also go with Aston Martin.
Cool. Yeah, and I think with our predictions at the start of the year, I had McLaren as P8, I believe,
Yeah, you
something like
did. Yeah.
that. Yeah, and I was looking pretty good for the first five, six races, and
Yeah.
yeah, no, obviously they shattered that, but yeah,
Well, you were
some tough
chirping me
preseason picks
for
from us.
Yeah, you were chirping me for Mercedes and I was chirping you for McLaren. And I guess we were both right, but then again, we were both incredibly wrong. So, yeah, okay. So Aston Martin is the surprise of the season. Their great start, not their terrible mid-season, because I also think that was quite surprising how hard they fell off. Okay, so the final breakie, there should be no discussion. It's driver of the season.
Let me think. Uh, yeah, I know, man. Like that was an unbelievable season by Max Verstappen, literally for the history books. Um, the amount of records that guy smashed this year is insane, and some of them I don't know if they'll ever be broken again. Um, he's not only breaking other people's records, but he's starting to break his own records that he already holds. And it's honestly just crazy to see. And I mean, he is his own person, and he's talked about retiring early and wanting to do something else. But as long as he's winning, I can't see him leaving Formula One. And I don't see Red Bull or him losing until the new regulations in 26. I can't see another competitor getting to Red Bull's level because they've gotten such a massive advantage and gap that they've made. They started developing next year's car before anybody else, and wind tunnel time did nothing to them. And yeah, no, just everything with Red Bull, the mechanics, the strategy, the driver, the car, everything is honestly blending perfectly. And it's it's again, it's not just the car either. Like you saw what Perez did in the same car. Yes, the car is a big factor, but Max Verstappen is he's a different beast.
Well, I'm glad to have you on the podcast because I've said plenty already this season about Max, and I'm quite frankly tired of it. And I've ran out of words to compliment the man with because I agree with everything you say. I mean, like he's clearly the best in Formula One right now. I think no one wants to have the conversation yet, but I think you could already argue he's one of the greatest of all time. Just what do you think was the most, I mean, this is a hard maybe question to answer on the spot, but like, what do you think was the most impressive record that he broke this season?
It's got to be the consecutive wins for me. Like to have that concentration and that focus week in, week out. like again, it your mechanics and your strategy and everything could go perfect, but like for the driver to then complete the rest of it, or if one of those three pieces is missing, it can completely mess you up. Like if even if your car malfunctions, like that happens all the time. Um, but for everything to just be running on all cylinders, it was perfection, and that was like by far the most impressive thing for me personally.
I mean, the one that I'm picking is very similar to the 10 wins in a row. For me, it's the winning percentage. And the only reason that I am choosing the winning percentage over the streak is because the winning percentage record was set in like 1952. That was a season with 13 races or whatever it was. And this is a
Sure.
season with 23, and he won 85% of them, I think. Maybe it was even higher. I honestly forget, but just the fact that that amount, like we all thought that Ascari's record would never be broken just because of the length of the season. And Max Verstappen goes out and does this. I mean, yeah, I've said enough, and I have already broken down this record on my podcast as well. But that to me is the most impressive record that he broke this season. I also think 1,000 laps led is also just ridiculous. Like I joked again on a prior episode, like when I told Amber, I mean, you know, my girlfriend. So I told Amber that, you know, I spent this entire year watching Max Verstappen lead Formula One laps 1,000 times. How does that make you feel? And she was like, why did you like that sounds like such a waste of time. And I'm like, yeah, it probably was. But yeah, that's just so absurd. So of course Max is the driver of the season, but we gotta pick a second best then, right? To at least have some sort of debate. Um, I think it's got to be between Fernando, probably Lando, Lewis, or Alex, probably, or
Yeah,
or
those are
Charles, or Charles.
yeah, number two would actually be like really difficult because all those drivers you just mentioned did have like different um splashes throughout the season of where they really stood out. Um, I mean, Albon's just crazy. Like to go back to Albon, like for him to do that in a Williams, like that was an amazing year for him. Charles, honestly, like I think he had a pretty disappointing season. He had little bits, but like,
He
and
was
he had a
so
pretty
good at the
good
end.
at the end. He was good, but like overall, I couldn't put him as a second. Like he was the second best driver
But
for an
like
entire
also he's
season.
he's still got like 5 pole positions this year. Like in qualifying, the man is
Yeah,
so good.
no, he's still like he's like one of the fastest drivers on the grid for sure. Um, and I don't know, like the Fernando and Lando thing is tough too because they both had like Fernando was so good at the start and then dropped, but then Lando came in and was so good. Um, I don't know. Number two is really hard. I personally I'd have to go with Fernando
I
to
think
do
I would
that at
lean
his.
I think I would lean Fernando too, but I'll just put this out there. Um, I think Charles and Lewis were the only two in this conversation that actually had a teammate that was like a fair benchmark for them. Fernando going against Lance Stroll was always going to be a joke. Albon going against Logan Sargent, like I could never put Albon number two just because that's who his teammate was, and like we all know, your teammate is really the only thing that we can compare drivers to. And then Piastri, although he was a great rookie and showed good pace in qualifying sometimes, he's also a rookie, and we all expected Lando to smash him, and he did on Sundays this year. So I think that's the only thing that I think we have to keep in mind when grading Charles and grading Lewis is just who they're up against inside their own teams. But with that being said, I still think the moments that Fernando had this season were his peaks were so high, and
Yeah.
that's why I would pick him as well. So I agree with you. So Max then Fernando is our top two. And then yeah, that's all the awards. The same as last year though. I ended off with just getting you to rate the season out of 10. I think last year you said a 7, maybe a 6.5. I think you said 6.5 or 7. So what do you got for this season?
I don't know, 10.
10
No,
out of
I'm
10.
just
Objectively,
kidding.
not as a Red Bull fan.
Yeah, I mean, as if I was a casual watcher and wasn't a fan of Max Verstappen or Red Bull, this would probably be like a 4 or 5 or a 5. Some great
That's still
moments, some good moments, but overall, just like I don't know how many times like either Maya or my parents or like other people would ask me, being like, "Why are you like staying up or why are you waking up early to watch the race? Like, don't you know the result?" And I'm like, "Yeah, but." I've never really had a but. Like
Yeah,
there was
but like
only
Formula One.
yeah, like there wasn't much else to like for me to be like talk about, or I don't know. Of course there's other storylines, but you knew what you're getting week in and week out. Where last year was a little bit different with Charles in the mix. Um yeah, I don't know. It was pretty
Last
poor.
year just seemed to throw up more curveballs and stuff too,
Yeah.
where it didn't feel like it was, even though when Max was dominating at the end of the season, it didn't feel like such a foregone conclusion. Where like really early on in the season, it was like, okay, so Max, how many seconds is Max going to win by this
Mm.
Sunday? So yeah, I think 4 to 5 is still higher than a lot of people would give this season. Um, I think personally, I would give it like a 3. Like it's, and I love Formula One, and I'm just, if a season's got to be like a 3 or a lower, it's got to be a season like this because we didn't even have a silly season either, man. Like all the drivers are returning to the exact same teams next year. We got just nothing for Formula One fans this year, and it's a shame. Um, well, of course we always get something, but you know what I mean. Like it didn't really throw up anything besides a win for Sainz and Daniel Ricciardo returning to the paddock and stuff like that. Like that's pretty much it. So yeah, I think I'd give it like a 3, to be honest.
Yeah, some pretty weak storylines as a Max fan, or honestly, like as a Formula One fan, you still have to appreciate and respect the dominance of Max. Like that was unbelievable, and we might not see something like that ever again. So that aspect was I loved. Um, Even if Lewis was doing that or Leclerc was doing that or whoever, like you just have to sit back and respect what they're doing because that is so hard to achieve. So in that respect, yeah, the season was good, but as a casual fan looking at everything, yeah, it's definitely lower. And Drive to Survive is going to have a really tough time producing their show next year.
That's that's a good point. I I I will say this. This is one of those seasons where in the moment it was like that was a pretty terrible season. 10 years from now, we're going to be able to be like, yeah, we watched Max dominate in 2023. Like
Exactly.
it was crazy.
Yeah.
So it's going to be one of those, I think down the road, it's going to stand out a little bit more. Where like, even though 2022 had all these dramas, you might remember 2023 better for how, like, just the greatness that we watched this year. So it is kind of
Yeah.
funny how that works out. But yeah, that's it, man. Thanks for coming on the pod for the last episode of the season. It's always fun handing out these awards. So yeah, thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
As always, super fun to have Shaq on the pod. The Brakies is always probably one of the most fun segments that this podcast does the entire year. So that was always a lot of fun. Now we get to maybe a little bit less fun and a little bit more humiliation, revisiting my predictions from the preseason and, of course, the second half as well, because we did do a little bit of revisiting during the summer break with the King of the Take Boys. So we're going to review the picks that we made as well during the summer break for kind of our rest of season predictions. But, of course, we're going to start out with the standings and see just how bad I did. And let me tell you, I did pretty poorly considering I got one of the 20 spots correct. Now, of course, it is a little bit unfair because just because I got things slightly out of order doesn't mean that I was way off with a lot of my picks. But of course, there were a few surprises, like of course Aston Martin having the start that they did, and McLaren also kind of flying up the pack to overtake Alpine. So I had Alpine definitely too high, but we'll see. We're going to start off with the driver standings. So 20th, I had Sargent. So this is another one that's a little bit unfair because he finished 21st. So I did have him correctly last. But then again, I had De Vries 19th and De Vries was 22nd. So two drivers that I just didn't I did not expect Liam Lawson and Daniel Ricciardo to be in any seats this year, and they both made it into the top 20. So automatically, 4 positions are going to be like wrong just off the bat there. So yes, I had Sargent 20, DeVries 19. However, again, I was wrong, but I picked basically the correct 2 that were going to finish last. So yeah, that is unfortunate. And I did say, I believe, in a separate episode, or maybe in that same episode, that every driver would score a point. Now, DeVries didn't, but he also didn't get a full season. If you just take that second AlphaTauri seat, then that seat did score twice in the year, and then Sargent did score once. So I'll take that as a W as well. So, of course, Liam Lawson did actually finish 20th, and DeVries did not finish 19th. It was actually Magnussen. Now, 18th. This is probably the one that I got the most wrong out of any of them, and that is Albon. I had Albon in 18th. I just didn't think the Williams car would be any good. In fact, at the beginning of the season, I said that they would maybe go backwards just with all the turmoil they had, with their team principal and no technical director entering the season. I just didn't see them making any substantial progress. But honestly, the Williams was kind of a sick car this year, because I truly believe that when you're kind of a backmarker team and just hoping to score points on those random weekends, it's almost better to have like a really obvious strength in your car that you're able to exploit. Of course, Albon had some great performances, as I mentioned, with Shaq, but when you're like just all around okay, kind of like the Alfa Romeo, for example, you're less likely to stand out on any given weekend, and more likely to just kind of pick up 12ths and 13ths very often, where the Williams sometimes was truly horrendous. But then on some weekends, because of its well-balanced nature and slippery on the straights strength, it was able to have great weekends on circuits like Montreal, like Shaq mentioned, where there's a lot of straights and just chicanes. Same thing with Monza, very similar tracks. I do think it's a lot better when you're a backmarker to have something that you're just really good at and you're able to exploit. Anyway, of course, that was actually Zhou who finished 18th, and Albon was way further up in 13th, so nowhere close here. And this one was also pretty wrong. Next, I had Tsunoda. I was kind of right at the beginning of the season with how poor AlphaTauri would be, but it was actually more so because of their drivers. I thought their drivers would be the ones letting the team down, not the car. In fact, it was the car. Tsunoda was brilliant. So 17th actually was Ricciardo. So again, these two were kind of the stars of the back markers, and I had them 17 and 18, so not a great look. The next 2 I had were Zhou and Bottas, where I did have Bottas ahead of Zhou, so again, I was correct there. I had Tsunoda ahead of DeVries, where I was correct there. I had Albon ahead of Sargent. So you see what I mean? Like, I had the driver head-to-heads correct. It's more so where I had the teams placing that was wrong. Of course, Bottas actually finished 16th, where Zhou finished, and then Hülkenberg was where Bottas finished. So, again, I'm getting the right ones because I had Hülkenberg ahead of Magnussen. Coming up here, it's I had Magnussen in 14th and Hülkenberg in 13th. So I had Haas doing better than Alfa Romeo, Williams, and AlphaTauri. So, of course, when the constructors' predictions come up, you'll see that I was quite wrong there. But again, the head-to-head was correct. So these were kind of the stars of the back markers that I predicted, but that did not happen. So this was Albon and Tsunoda who finished 13th and 14th. Then it was quite a jump up to the Alpine pair. Except here, I thought Stroll would kind of finish at the back of the midfield to the front pack, which I don't think was a terrible prediction. Also, it just that I didn't expect the Alpine to be so far off from the rest of the pack. So 12th was actually Ocon. I had Stroll, and then in P11 was actually Gasly, and I had Piastri. So Piastri was just a couple positions off, actually. Yeah, I was at Piastri. So P10, I had Pierre Gasly finishing in the top 10. He was one off. This was actually Lance Stroll. P9, this is the worst one of all, I think. Maybe Albon is. Albon was 6 positions off. This was actually only 5 positions off. But this is where I had Fernando Alonso, just because I thought Alonso would be great in the Aston Martin, and Aston Martin would take a step forward. I, of course, didn't anticipate the step forward that they did take. So, again, I got the head-to-head right. The only head-to-head I got wrong was Alpine, and this is where I had Esteban Ocon finishing P8. So that was, even though that was only 4 positions off where he finished, it was probably my worst one, considering I had him ahead of Piastri and Alonso. So pretty poor job there. So I guess I didn't say P9 was actually Piastri. P8 was George Russell. So that was actually one of my worst ones as well. I didn't even realize that. Yeah, I was way off with George Russell. Then P7. This one is actually kind of funny because I'm only 1 position off, but it's kind of a bad prediction. So I had Lando Norris in P7, and I put in P7 because of the amount of P7 finishes he had last year, and I just imagined that he was going to be the best of the rest once again. In fact, where that really wasn't the case at all. He really smashed his teammate and was one of the stars of the season. It just ended up being a lot closer between who was fighting for P2, of course, with Mercedes, Ferrari, Aston Martin, and McLaren all having their moments. So I had Norris in the right area, just not for the right reason, and I had him backwards with Sainz. So Sainz is who actually finished 7th. I had Sainz in 6th, where Norris actually finished. So I was close there, but really it was never in consideration at the beginning of the year to put Lando Norris ahead of Carlos Sainz. So I would have had a pretty big gap here if I actually kind of predicted the amount of points they would score. So that's where I had Sainz, which, I mean, I guess is about right. He was behind Leclerc, and I did imagine that he would be kind of in that range, near the bottom of the top teams. And then for 5th, I had Sergio Perez. And this is, of course, because I thought it would be a lot closer at the front, and Perez would, let Red Bull down. And in a way, he still did. I just didn't anticipate the Red Bull being so dominant. So 5th was actually Charles Leclerc, where I had Leclerc in 4th. So, again, pretty close. I had him ahead of Sainz. So, like I said, I got all the driver head-to-heads correct. It's really just where the teams were that I got really wrong, and you'll see that in the constructors' picks. So it is still funny, though, that we've gone through all of this. I get the driver head-to-heads pretty much all correct, and I can't get any of them in the right position, because 3rd, I had George Russell. P2, I had Lewis Hamilton. Of course, Hamilton was actually 3rd. Russell was actually 8th, so I was pretty far off there. But again, I had Hamilton in the right, Hamilton ahead of Russell, which was correct. Of course, Perez was actually P2, and then I did have Max Verstappen as the driver's champion, the only position I got correct. So, pretty shocking effort from me there. But yeah, as I said, I think if you read into it a little bit more, it's not as bad as it actually seems on the surface. I think the constructors is actually worse, considering I did only get 1 right here, and it wasn't even Red Bull. I managed to botch the champions as well. So P10, I had Williams. It was actually Haas. P9, I had AlphaTauri. It was actually Alfa Romeo. P8, I had Alfa Romeo, and it was actually AlphaTauri. So those were just flip-flopped. And then Williams and Haas were also flip-flopped. I had Haas kind of best of the back markers, where it was actually Williams who finished P7. So it's pretty bad. Like, everyone kind of knew that they would be the bottom 4. It would have been a shock to see any team enter that bottom 4, and to get all of them wrong is just a pretty poor effort from me there. P6, I was too cowardly to move Aston Martin up the order, so I did have them in P6, where that, of course, was actually Alpine in absolute no man's land this season. P5, I could have got this one right, and I still put McLaren there and Alpine P4. So to pick Alpine ahead of McLaren is also just so bad. I mean, Alpine ahead of Aston Martin too. Alpine P4 is a shocking prediction, as if I had any faith in that team. So bad. The only team I got right was Ferrari. I had Ferrari in P3, so that was correct. And then I had Red Bull P2 and Mercedes as the constructors champions. I don't know what's worse, McLaren P8 or Mercedes Constructors Champions. I think Mercedes Constructors Champions is a lot worse. Man, I really thought that they had sorted out whatever issues they had with the W13, and that was going to be resolved in the W14, except that was not the case, and the W14 was really just more of kind of an ugly stepsister to the W13. Hopefully, the W15 is much better, but yes, the constructors' standings was also a shocking effort, even though technically on percentage-wise, 1 out of 10 is better than 1 out of 20. But yeah, not getting the champion right in a season like this is pretty horrendous as well. So laugh at me all you want, but it is harder than it looks to make predictions at the beginning of the season in Formula One and get them right. So yeah, now let's move on to the second half predictions that the King of the Take Boys made with myself. It was only 5 questions, so this will be over before you know it. The first question was, will there be a new winner in Formula One? At this point, Red Bull had swept the entire first half of the season. We kind of came to an agreement that it was going to be no, and Red Bull was going to sweep, although I will give Darnell credit. He said that he would take the field and there would be some sort of shenanigans, not actually really what kind of happened in Singapore. He thought that there would be a reliability concern or maybe a crash that gave someone else the win, but that really wasn't the case. Red Bull really just kind of botched their setup in Singapore and allowed some team apart from Red Bull, could have been Ferrari, could have been McLaren, could have been Mercedes, to capitalize. And of course, Carlos Sainz was that man to capitalize. So we were wrong there. Will Daniel Ricciardo outperform Tsunoda? This was a question that kind of was ruined right away, considering Ricciardo was injured basically right after the summer break, but he did get to come back. And we did all say that he wouldn't outperform Tsunoda. And even though it was close at times, I would say that Ricciardo didn't outperform Tsunoda. But considering everything that he had to go through, I think Ricciardo did have himself a pretty decent campaign for his return. This was probably the worst one that we predicted. Will McLaren catch Aston Martin at the summer break? We said no. We did not think it was possible, but we also did not envision the lowest of the lows and the highest of the highs that McLaren had. But Aston Martin's lows in like Mexico and Austin were so low. They were so bad. And plenty other races just fiddling around at the bottom of the points. We expected a couple more races like Zandvoort for Aston Martin to kind of keep hold of their position over McLaren, and I don't think we expected races like Japan and Qatar where McLaren would have these massive points hauls. So yep, we were pretty wrong there, and in fact it shouldn't even have been as close as it was at the end of the year. So yep, all 3 of us I think agreed that McLaren was not going to be able to do it. In P7 we did have Williams. All 3 of us agreed that Williams is going to hold on to that spot. It got pretty close in the end with AlphaTauri kind of surging at the end of the year, but we were all correct. And this is a full credit to the King of the Tape guys, because they're the ones that actually made this prediction. And I kind of just said, okay, I don't think I actually made my own prediction here. They said silly season was going to be boring. They did not say it was going to be 20 out of 20 returning. That would have been a pretty special thing to predict, considering it's never happened before. But they did say it was going to be a boring, silly season, and it definitely was. So credit to the King of the Take Boys for that one. Well, guys, that's going to do it for the last Break Bias episode of 2023. Next year, the podcast could be looking a little different. I have some thinking to do over the winter break, so stay tuned for updates on that. But for now, enjoy the holidays. Have a great new year. I'm your host, Brad Kramer, and I will catch you all in 2024. Goodbye.